I called the Charlottesville City Council, special meeting to order. It's on the FY 27 budget. And Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilor Fleischer,
Here.
Vice Mayor Oshry,
Here.
Councilor Payne,
Here.
Councilor Snook,
Here.
Mayor Lee.
Here. Okay, so I'll turn it over to you, Sam, and.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I was not connected yet. But I'm there.
Oh, did you talk to us and stuff?
No, I'm good. I mean, you can if you like. All right.
So counselors and members of the public, tonight is your final planned work session. So we're going to talk about CIP. We also have an anticipation that you might choose to use some of the time to continue your discussions about decisions that you might make about your strategic initiatives fund or not. And then we're also looking for you to be able to help us understand if we need to have next week's work session on the 2nd. And if so, what topics might you be interested in us being able to work to prepare for? Because that is the catch-up session. So that's the one that we don't have anything planned for. It's usually where we try to make sure that we're pulling the final things together because your vote is on them. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Hamill, walk you through the CIP.
Thank you. So we're going to talk about the 5-year summary, look at the CIP revenues, talk a little bit about the debt projection, the 1% sales tax for school construction, and then just to fully close the loop on all of the sort of city grant processes. CDBG is one that pulls up the rear in terms of timing, and so we're just going to provide you with an application summary of who has submitted, how much they've requested, and what's available to be awarded. So we'll talk about that at the end. So jumping right into the CIP, it feels like we talked about this a long time ago. It was back in the fall. We met with the Planning Commission to discuss this. Nothing has really changed since that was presented. At the time, we talked about the CIP plan for 27 is just over 47 million, with 196 million over the 5 years. If we were to look in terms of dollars spent, education is the highest in this plan, followed by transportation and access, and then affordable housing coming in third. As you know, that kind of varies from year to year, depending on where projects are. The one thing that's driving the education in this 5-year plan is, of course, the additional funds for the pre-K center. But the graphs on the right-hand side of the sort of give you a visual of the categories in which we're spending the money, both in 27 and over the 5-year plan. And mostly it's pretty consistent over the 5 years, no real change there in terms of category spending. And so I'm going to run through the next few slides pretty quickly. This is just as a refresher of what's actually in each category. Anything that's highlighted in green denotes a change in the funding amount from the 26 plan to the 27 plan. There's not a lot of new things that have been added. So most of the things that are in this year's CIP are basically just adjustments to funding based on either additional project information or things that we know about inflation and those types of things. One thing you'll note on this school slide is that we did receive a request from staff that our funding for HVAC repairs and replacements, both in the city schools, but also city buildings as well. That funding was sort of lagging behind the cost. And so we did make an adjustment there to increase the funding in both of those pots of money. So this is the one for schools.
What had it been?
$750 a year. Sorry about that, Siri. Moving on to facilities, projects, again, the HVAC that we just spoke about, that had been 500,000 a year. And we increased that by $500,000 as well, and each year moving that up to $1 million. McGuffey roof replacement, that is something that was new, that was added, in this year's plan. That had not been in the plan previously, but is, from what I understand, long overdue. And so that's been programmed here.
For the HVAC replacement, is that, I mean, that's a nice round number. Have we done an analysis about what we need and that's reflected here, or is this kind of socking it away knowing projects are gonna come up?
I don't, do you want to speak to that?
You want me to go to the corner or just shoot from here? Good,
Go ahead.
okay. A lot of analysis has been done. There's always a running lump sum plan. And it's more than $1 million a year. So we rounded it to make it easy for you all to sort of swallow, but we could use even more than that. But I think that's a number that'll get us closer to what we actually need to keep things running.
And that's not schools, that's just other
City buildings, yeah.
things.
But on the previous slide was the school one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Moving on to public safety, not a lot of changes here. As we've spoken about before, many of these accounts are set up as recurring accounts, other than the fire truck replacement and the ambulances. The rest of the radios and the apparatus, we're funding those in an annual rate to both build up a reserve of funds so that we're not trying to fund the big numbers all at once, but also so that regular replacements can happen, so we don't end up with a big cliff every 5 or 6 years as they need to be replaced. They can do a cyclical replacement cycle on those things. Transportation and access, again, nothing new here other than the Dominion Power Pole remediation account. There were some changes in the amounts, but and most notably, the additional investment in the new sidewalks, which was based on the priority list that was presented to council with the tier, I think it was 1, 2, and 3 projects. The funds that are here represent correspond with that listing. Parks and Recreation, all of these accounts were also in last year's plan. Most notably though, in the 26 plan, we only had 1 year of $500,000 put in the CIP because we weren't sure what was going to come out of the plan or how those dollars were going to be spent. We spent a lot of time talking about those plans, and right now we're putting in the $500,000 a year to try to address some of the more immediate things, as there's further discussions that need to happen with council in terms of next steps on that.
I'll add on that, that we fully expect that going forward budget cycles, that line item for the Parks Master Plan will dramatically increase. We were not able to get to a place of being comfortable putting in any numbers at this time beyond these $500,000 amounts, just to be able to say that Parks has something available, some amount available to do some projects. There's still work to be done. Their master plan came in, if I'm remembering correctly, $78 million, $78 million for full implementation as visioned. So we know that those numbers need to be dramatically different if we're going to come anywhere close to that. But we now have an assistant city manager here who's going to be working with the team to try to figure out how do we allocate better over the next 5-year cycle. So those numbers will change. This is just to indicate what we're going to attempt to do right now.
So what is the Parks and Rec lump sum account? What does that mean?
Those are dollars that they have had for years for, it's a lot of maintenance, or like, replacing sort of small,
Ongoing.
ongoing things, benches, signs. They've used it for various things over the years, but it's basically just a small amount of money to allow them to do small projects as they come up during the year.
And they will budget each year. Their project list would be associated with how much those funds being available in any carryover from the year before.
Do they spend it all every year?
Pretty close, yes.
They too probably would say that they could spend more if we gave them more, because the maintenance issue came out as a very high priority in the Parks Master Plan. That a lot of what the study produced was we should invest a lot more in what we have and then begin to invest in taking it somewhere else.
Yeah, I don't know that it makes any real difference. I mean, you may be able to tell me that it does make a difference, but I get a little bit of puzzlement when I think of ordinary recurring maintenance expenses being regarded as capital.
And I probably described that in the wrong way. It's not really maintenance as much as it is small, not multi-million-dollar projects, but obviously small projects that need to happen within the parks or the parks facilities. So it's not painting and that kind of thing. It's more like replacement of benches or signs or, I think they've used it for some trail work or just a couple things that come up to the top of mind.
Do we have any sort of definition as to when something is enough that it is a capital expenditure as opposed to a maintenance expenditure? If you're replacing, I mean, it seemed to me that replacing a bench can't be more than $10,000. That strikes me as being a regular maintenance matter rather than a capital matter. And I guess my first question is, A, does it matter really which category we put it in? It matter for any accounting reason, or B, does it matter for, and I don't know, sort of definitional purposes? I remember, again, going back to when I was on the planning commission, we had a definition of capital expense that basically, I don't remember what it was, a minimum of $100,000 or something like that, but there was a notion that there was a threshold that it had to be more expensive than that to qualify as a capital expense.
No, it's I'll just answer it from the budget and then accounting piece, and then I'll defer to Evan, but essentially we try to look for something that's 50,000 or more, is what we consider capital. And again, I'm not doing this account justice, and maybe Evan can, but it's not like we're replacing one bench. We sort of look at that as a so they might replace all the benches in a park or whatever they're doing in a particular area. It's not really, it is more infrastructure related than maintenance related.
I really don't have anything more to add other than we also look at it as like a capital refresh for a park. So it might be replacing a bench, but it's also doing 5 or 6 other things. So in that whole capital refresh, that's where it also gets to a capital eligibility.
Is that something that is a bondable expense?
Yeah, I mean.
Okay, so there's a definitional reason to call it one versus the other.
Yeah. We wouldn't bond a $10,000 bench, but if we were able to go and refresh the park, that would be a bondable sort of thing that we could look at in total. But we can provide you with some more specifics to give you some better comfort of actually what they're using this money for.
I don't want to suggest that I am uncomfortable.
No,
I'm
I'm
just-
sorry. Yeah,
Puzzled.
no, it's a fair question and we'll get you some better details.
It's definitely not small expenditures, I can assure you of that, because we have too many things that need to be done. I know one example would be that we have found ourselves having to go in and do work on restrooms outside of the normal schedule. And that's because individuals have gone in and they've done damage to the restroom, so it takes it off its cycle. So we have to go in and we have to replace all the accessory pieces in the bathroom because they were destroyed. like that happens way more often than any of us appreciate.
We'll get you some info.
And I'm looking at some details and actually getting some other information in as we speak. So it's things like benches, yes, bike racks, grills, dog waste stations, picnic tables, trash receptacles, water fountain. And then some more significant repairs would be like tennis courts. They also have garden plots and pool work. So that's the kind of thing that ends up in that line.
May I ask about the trees active life cycle management? Is that from the 4 point something million that we've seen for the downtown mall trees? Those are two different.
Yep, and I see one thing on my color coding here. There actually is a new account that I missed. The city county park maintenance joint parks. That is for the joint parks between the city and the county. And the county asked if the city could create an account by which we could use that for projects or things that come up during the year. We didn't previously have that. We had just been budgeting for, paving or tree replacement. And so this amount of funds is there to help with those projects as they come along.
Was that
It's a
specific?
joint account.
Darntow, Ivy Creek,
Oh, okay.
are the two, I think.
So is it a joint account? Like we've contributed X, they've contributed X?
Yeah.
That's our account for
Yeah.
our share of the
Yeah.
expenses.
And who spends that money?
The county, and then they bill us.
Can we check back in about, there are the two line items on here for the downtown mall management plan, tree management plan and the active life cycle management? What's different about those?
I can do this one.
Go ahead.
So the active life cycle is that every year, sometimes multiple times a year, we have to go through and like trim branches, hazard branches and stuff like that. So it's going through and doing that ongoing tree maintenance work so that we don't have limbs falling and damaging property or people. Right? The other one is actually the larger project that we did that whole tree management plan for, that is about really over time renewing and replacing the trees up and down the whole wall.
Thank you.
And I know that we had a presentation on the fact that there was going to be a systematized management plan. I was curious, since we're gonna be spending in FY 28 at this point, projected to triple the amount in any other year. Is there something in particular planned for FY 28?
Yeah, what I believe that is so the plan actually calls for replacement of, we call the groupings of trees bosks, right? Replacing those bosks,
All at once?
all at once.
Uh-huh.
And I don't recall in this instance, but I think that in this instance, I think that involves taking out the trees, taking out the bricks and the soil, replacing that soil. Because remember, one of the things we learned is the trees are planted in the old road bed, which is
Right.
part of the reason they aren't doing as well as they ought to be. So taking out the soil, putting in better soil, replanting the trees, and then relaying the bricks. So it's a big project for each one of those.
I'm just, is it thought that, we'll do one of those in FY 27 and 3 of them in FY 28 or something?
Yeah,
or-
they are spaced out because the idea is that we don't want to do all the trees at once.
Sure.
So we
Yeah.
don't take out the entire canopy. I don't,
Was that the one in Central?
I think that's the one in central, yeah.
We do have.
Which is the
Rihanna
biggest
in-
problem.
on the
Yeah.
line.
Rion's online, we could have him.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Great. He's in a better position.
Good evening. Yeah, so how we designed it was since it's for Central Place, that where we're going to do the vast of trees. But how we designed it was that the first year is going to be A&E work. So we're going to have to get an architect, a landscape architect to come in to design that. And that's why you see the second year is a higher price. That means it's for construction. So if you look at that, 500 and something in the first year, that's A&E work, and the second year is construction just for phase one. So this project, if you can recall, the report calls for a 20-year plan to replace trees on the downtown mall. So that is, we are just talking about phase one.
Thanks, Rion. Sorry, I forgot you were online.
With the Parks Master Plan. Obviously, that is something that lots of people in the community care about and are watching, and it'd be transformative in terms of our parks and services. As you referenced, the cost is 70+ million, $500,000 a year, and again, you kind of acknowledge this, is essentially not currently implementing it. What is our approach going to be towards working to that point?
Yeah, I can answer that question. So what Parks and Recreation staff did is we looked at the entire master plan, and we worked collectively is coming up with a 10-year plan of how are we going to accomplish all the projects, and we prioritized it. What staff recommended was, let's try to look at high impact for the first year or two with low cost. And that's where you get the $500,000, where we are looking at new park signs. Those are small impacts, but high impacts for the community, because we did not want to look at a big project. For example, we have 4 parks that is called out in the master plan. We just did not want to put all our money into one bucket of, let's say, $2 million, and it takes us 4 years to get accomplished, where the community is looking for some improvement. So that is what we are looking at, is looking at high impact for the community with a low cost. And that's where we have the first year of 500,000, as everybody mentioned, signage, redo of benches, adding shelters, or canopies at areas like our splash pads at certain parks that people have been asking for. So small impacts before we get to the big ticket items.
In the future years for the big ticket items, again, $70+ million, is part of that conversation going to be whether or not city council approves an additional revenue source that's just for parks? I'm just trying to think through what 70+ million, like what would it look like to actually do that?
You're muted.
Good question. So as we do understand, and in the back of our master plan, it calls for, we know that $78 million is a lot of money, but it calls also for staff to look at other opportunities in terms of grants. So number one, what the department looked at is let's prioritize what is important for the community, which we did, a 10-year plan. Then what we are going to look at is, how do we achieve that in terms of, we know that we will not be able to get $78 million directly from capital improvement, but what other grant opportunities we do have. But in order for us to get there, we have to right size our department and the city. Again, we are working in partnership with Public Works, reaching out to their department is to say, hey, do you have any resources? We are looking at the grants department as to say, how can we get there? So to close up is that we are looking at all these facets before just jumping in and just requesting a lot of funding at one given time. But we are looking at different stages of how do we meet the goals of the community.
And I'll add just for further explanation that direction that I've given as well has been that I did not want to see us placing numbers into the CIP that are not real. We've had a history of that.
Yeah.
And I don't want I don't want us to slip back to that. So a lot of the effort has been around the idea that if we put the money in CIP in this recurring fashion, then the intent is that it gets spent. So whatever numbers go in there are hard pressed because we have so many priorities that we're trying to balance, that if we put it there, we need to spend it. We also have the 4 plans that still also need to be done for Market Street, Court Square, Washington Park, and Tonsler. They're big ticket items just in the plan and the construction documents before we make a movement of change at any one of those parks. We need to spread those out as well, because we're gonna spend a lot of money on designing and nobody's gonna see anything. So that's gonna take away from actual physical improvements that get to be made at parks as well. So we need to have a little more conversation about where to place them, spreading them out so that we can see change as well as plan for change at the same time. That's the reason why we took another year in spending more time to try to figure out how to put a true 5-year plan together. That will look different. It'll have an ebb and flow to it, where you'll see the numbers changing from 500,000 to well over 1 million or 2 possibly. And in the presentation that I made to you, it's why the decisions pending page exists. Remember, Parks was one of those bags of money that is a decision pending that we need to be able to figure out how do we get it fit in with that bigger price tag.
Thank you.
Any more questions on Parks and Rec projects? Okay, so moving along to the affordable housing projects. This is, again, these were all projects that were in the plan last year. The only real change at this point is 501 Cherry. There is $700,000 that was added to 28 based on an action that you took just several weeks ago. And the Carlton Mobile Home Park, the loan has been finalized, which allowed us to reduce the amount that we had in the budget last year for those annual payments, but noting that there is a balloon payment in 2030 for that.
And you'll notice that the Salvation Army line item is still there. It is meant to just be there until we know that that conversation is dead at the Cherry Avenue location. I thought it was important enough for us to leave it there until we really started to see how this drive conversation materializes schedule-wise, as well as there's still an opportunity for discussion with the Salvation Army about doing something there. So I just decided to give ourselves another year before we have to make a decision on taking it out.
At least it might end up being
Right.
family shelter or something else.
Right.
I've asked this before and I always forget. Park Street Maca is underway. We funded it. Where does that live in our budget? Is that like a surplus that's already allocated or like?
It's in the CIP last year, I think. Last 2 years, it was funded, but so it's basically funded, the money's sitting there waiting to be drawn down.
It just fell off because of when it was budgeted for.
Right, but it's not yet dispersed, but
Not
it's still
dispersed.
there.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah.
And CSRAP, that is program with a lot of discussions to be had around it, and I know kind of where is that at, and what's kind of the next steps for determining things around CSRAP?
It was end of fiscal year.
Yeah. I think we're looking at the next update before the end of this fiscal year. Still more work to do, and I think, as you know, we've also have staff shortage there that we need to refill positions so that we can get back on schedule with that.
But the funding remains the same at the 900,000 as a projection for the next 5 years. That could change, of course, once we get that work done. That's part of what the original conversation was about. Either going up or down, honestly, just depending on if we set parameters, that would mean that the contributions would change, or if we add more people. So this now just keeps it as a placeholder at the current budget. So that we would say that for the next fiscal year, the program doesn't change potentially, but it could, just depends on what that update is.
But it's possible that some basic things around how it operates could change.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Then the final category is the technology infrastructure. The communications technology account, that's a funded account through PEG fees that has to be used on our public access TV. Citywide IT infrastructure, this is an account that we use to help with things that come up during the year, or for things that are not previously budgeted, but we have to adjust for. And then the voting equipment, this is, I think, year 2 or 3 of funding. That gets us to a total for the replacement that will be taking place in 27. And so all of that brings us to a total of the just over $47 million for 27 and $196 million over the 5 years. Any questions on expenditures?
Yes.
Okay.
Backing up to the transportation and access projects page. Just because of something that was mentioned when we were talking about parks. Where in the small capital projects, bike racks were mentioned. I'm assuming that is just bike racks that are in parks, not the
Yes.
bike rack program in
Correct.
general. So in the transportation line item, and I probably asked this before, but just to clarify, what counts as bicycle infrastructure in that line item?
Yeah. I think it include, do we have anyone who can speak to that directly?
Check and see.
My memory says that includes bike racks. And that's the primary thing I can think of that we've used or have used that funds for, but
We've used it also for like some of the striping and things for the bike lanes. And then, I know as of late, some of the VO revenues that we get, have been used for like the website and the,
Subsidy program.
thank you, yes. And so I think it's been used for various things.
So if we were to have a project that was like adding a curb to a street to make a protected bike lane, where would that money come from?
Likely
it
here.
could potentially come from there, yeah.
Okay, and it's not a huge number, which leads me to believe we don't have plans to do that just yet.
No, but the other thing that when I think about what you're describing, that's a project that I suspect could get expensive really quickly, and it would probably end up being a standalone project in and of itself, that we would do it in a concert with a larger streetscape project, because if we're adding a curb, we're changing on a street, we're potentially changing how the water flows, and so now you've got a bunch of downstream impacts.
Yeah, very true. So for the, we did the quick builds projects with the idea that we would study their effect and see which ones we wanted to harden and that sort of thing. Where does that live?
That's something that we've been discussing, is actually setting up just like we did with the sidewalk program, where we created a tiered sidewalk replacement program. We're talking about doing the same thing with quick builds, where we would take the quick build programs and tier out what could be what can be easily done, what's kind of in a mid-tier, what's a more difficult tier, and then building out a line where we would pay for those improvements.
Okay, and what's the What's the timeline on putting something like that together?
Evan, I know this is something you've been looking into, right?
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
it's something that we're in process right now. I would expect that in the next few months, we'll have something. But it's important to note that as part of the tiers that James was talking about, the public engagement portion really needs to be fleshed out because we put these temporary measures out, we've gotten some good feedback, but we haven't gone back to consult with the neighborhood to really get a full sense of whether these are features that we do want as a community.
Mhm.
So that's also gonna play into the timeline for implementation and hardening of those features.
That's, yeah, that is true. Is, if there's if somehow this process, the tiering system, the community engagement activities happen, and we have that list that's ready to go before next budget cycle, would it come as a CIP request and like?
It depends on how
October or
much, it depends on what it really depends on how much it adds up as. Typically, when it's something that's not budgeted and it's of a certain size, then it's a surplus request.
Yeah.
So that's usually how it would come. And it would just be a matter of what else is being considered for whatever balance of surplus we have available. If it were a small amount, then usually sometimes what happens is departments try to determine, I'm thinking of Mike because he's sitting here. Mike knows that Sam is sometimes undisciplined and will say, hey, Mike, I need you to do this. And Mike wants to make me happy. So he'll figure out how to make his lump sum account work for me. And then he'll figure out the impact of it later. We can do that from time to time, but we're trying to discourage more of that, which is why he hasn't had me do that to him lately. But I have done it in the past. So sometimes.
Big
it's how
enough,
that
you would
gets
come
done.
present, we'd allocate.
Yes.
And just going back to your, excuse me, question on the bike infrastructure. As of December, there's about $991,000 sitting there unspent in addition to what we have in the 5-year plan. So part of that, I think, when Mr. Chambers last came before you, was that he has what he needs for right now, but he would be working on a different plan, like the sidewalks.
And so this is why we're not
Putting anything in.
putting much in because we want to maintain, but we don't
We
want
wanna
to,
spend.
want to make sure we can spend it on real projects. Okay,
And more likely he had that, knowing Ben, that is already spent in his head.
sure.
I'm not
He-
saying
yeah.
more than in his head. I'm sure he even has it written down in a spreadsheet somewhere
Well,
too.
I know there's, everyone's got a work plan, but what can we do to fast track?
You're doing it, so I'm bringing it up.
Great. Consider it forgotten.
That's.
Consider it brought.
You got Counselor Snook to react, so don't do that again. But what I'll
There
say.
actually is an old English.
Bring it
I
on.
know you had a
later.
reaction to it, yeah.
No, bring it on's
Yes.
years old, but we can watch it later.
But you're in
That's
the
almost
same stuff that I am as it relates to the CIP. I want us to move away from any notion that the CIP is a slush fund, is a savings account, is a place to hold, unless approved by the budget team. And that savings account component is we save over a period of time to avoid the cliff that Chrissy mentioned. Those are appropriate moments, not tuck it away so that I'll have it available to me to pull out and do something. That's not disciplined behavior, and this is really supposed to be about discipline management so that we can use as much of the available resources to do as many things as we possibly can for any given year.
Okay, great, thanks.
I have one other transportation related question. Are we spending anything out of this budget or does it come out of some other budget for bus shelters? Which we've talked about from time to time, but
Yeah,
certainly isn't appearing here.
It's in the cap budget.
Does it come out of CAT budget?
it's in their budget specifically. I know that
Okay.
we did I'm remembering that we gave extra money in the surplus
We did, I mean, we're.
for a set of projects, but it is baked into their budget
Okay.
because they get money from the state and feds to help cover those, part of those expenses.
And the county is paying.
And the county is paying for some as well.
And we're in the midst of a study We just saw a presentation on it, Carta, right?
A beautiful presentation.
Yeah, very well done presentation.
Okay.
Looking at what are the deficiencies across our bus shelter network.
I need to see
It
that.
was a proper bus stop audit.
Yep. What each of them has, what each of them needs.
Oh, yeah.
You know, there's lighting maybe on the sign, but not for the people using the bus stop. There's, you know, a trash can earbud, but it's not really the bus stop. And, you know, we need this square footage of pad to improve, or like, what is the pad made of, or is there any kind of right of way access?
Want to make sure somebody's doing something about it.
Bus stops is a thing for me. Ms. Carey made that a thing.
Anything else on expenditures before we move on in any of the categories?
What is the historic district and entrance corridor design guideline? What's going on there?
Sure, so we have design guidelines which the VAR is meant to be does use for their review of projects within those different districts. And those guidelines are quite dated at this point in time, and particularly dated relative to the more recently adopted comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance. And so they are due for an update relative to those.
And what we did there was it was 75,000, I think, in 27 and 29, and we just moved it all up so that work can begin on that.
And is that basically, is that like funding for like a consultant? or
Yeah.
something? And so, and then the initiatives ended, zeroed out in the out years. Is there a reason for that?
It was just because we identified it as a 5-year commitment initially. And the goal is to monitor the use of the funds and determine by making further allocations based on using those funds. So that's still a question. We've had some efforts have been to try to go after big grants. And in going after big grants, we take big chunks of that money and set it aside as the local match in case we get the grant. We haven't landed the grant yet, so therefore we have money that has been able to build up. And again, my desire is to have us not have any money sitting for long periods of time unspent. So the part of the reason for not putting anything into those later years is to see what happens over the next few years, because climate is a challenging topic for the federal administration today. So not knowing what the chances are going to be for being able to do bigger ticket items, we may have to do more things that are smaller over time. And then that would help us determine, is it $1 million or is it $500,000 in those out years? Plus, it becomes a part of that reconciliation conversation as well.
Right. Appreciate that. I definitely would say, I think in the out years, the need will still remain.
Sure.
Nothing else for climate resilience. Climate change will still be occurring.
Real, yes.
The small area plans, is that a similar situation with some of these other items where the amount for implementation is basically 200,000 a year because we don't yet know?
It's been something like that number
been
for a long
recurring.
time. It's recurring. And what we've done is, you recall, I think 2 years ago now, we broadened that. Well, it still has the moniker small area plans. It's really geared towards producing small area plans and other implementation type plans that support land use planning on a finer scale and support implementation of the comprehensive plan. But it's a lump sum that is meant to be used to fund those studies.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm wrong. It seems like except for the one bridge project, we just haven't really spent money implementing small area plans to this point.
Yeah, oh, yeah, talking about small area plan implementation.
Correct.
Yeah, so the focus, one of the focuses as we move into our next era of small area plans is really to make sure that those plans, what'll differentiate those plans from previous ones is that they will be a lot more focused on identifying implementable plans. Implementable projects that this funding source will be used to achieve. So, each of these new plans, we're looking at whether there is a kind of a short timeframe that we're looking towards. What are the things we can concretely do within that timeframe and have a funding source in which to immediately move on them?
So we're doing a little bit of socking it away without knowing what it's gonna be for.
We are doing a little bit of socking away without knowing, yeah.
Well, but I'm not trying to talk out of both sides of my mouth, but that is because we have every intention of doing more small area plans. And we had a real request from the public to make sure that there was money available for implementation after the completion of the plans, because we weren't doing that part of it before. We would do the plans and then we would have to figure out how do we find a bucket of money to do something. And the plan implementation fund is the reset, because
It's the
that was
reset.
the strategic.
Yes.
Strategic something.
Strategic
fund.
investment area.
The strategic investment area. That was the only plan that we actually created a funding source for. And it went unspent. Counselor Snook used to tell us about it every year. So we wanted to make sure that we did something different about that. And that's when James requested the combining of small area plans and that fund. So it wasn't just for that area specifically, it was for all plans that we have on the books.
I guess it could be a whole nother topic of discussion, and I understand there's been changes, but it just still feels like unclear to me how it's being spent. And I know there's new small area plans underway, but even our existing ones, I mean, there's, you know, low-hanging fruit items about traffic calming measures and or intersections that we just haven't
I think
moved on.
to the question of how will we harden some of the improvement plans, some of the quick builds and things of that nature. If they're in small areas, small area plan areas, then that would be one of the funding sources that we could consider if we haven't already started to maximize it. I put pressure on anyone who uses those accounts that they have to spend them. Because the SIA account at one point was over $1 million with no idea on what it was gonna get spent on. So we've been trying to pivot those conversations to, let's identify projects so that we can plan to get this work done and let's spend it. Because the threat that I made was, and I'll take away the annual allocation if we're gonna let it sit and go. Because there are other things that we can use that money for.
Thank you.
So there really is an intention that as we complete small area plans, we're able to move quickly into implementation while there's the momentum in the plan.
Yep.
We've even talked about the fact that there are things that could be implemented while you're still in, if there's general consensus on something, let's do it while we're still technically, drafting the plan.
Makes sense. And just, sorry, one more
Yeah,
question. So for existing small area plans, the 10th and page one is underway. That'll be the next one. Do we only have Cherry Avenue as something to implement at this point, or do we consider the Star Hill to be a small area plan, or do we consider that to be this separate vision plan?
I mean, I think we.
Yes, and.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, Star Hill, if there's a project that we can implement in there, then we should look at it and move on it. There's no reason to not do that, but there's some history with that one, I guess. That one's before my time. Cherry has specific implementable things. You've got the North 29 one, which is really geared towards big, large scale, VDOT kind of interventions. And then you have the strategic investment area. So that's to the extent that I can remember, that's the whole list.
I would, not to get too in the weeds, but I would say with the Star Hill one, I think maybe this already exists and it could be dug up, maybe it needs to be determined, is a final determination of what the environmental situation is at City Yard and the scale and cost of environmental remediation. Because to me, that's basically the question that the city was about to make a final decision on years ago, and then there was turnover and all kind of things, but basically the answer to that question will determine, I think, is this actionable or not?
There may be more than that necessary to determine if it's actionable, but yes. I think that's the challenge with that plan is that I think there's a number of things that need to happen to figure out what, I mean, the central element of it being the redevelopment of that site. There's a number of things that need to happen to determine if that's actionable.
Right.
I'll say that one of my desires has been, and I talked to James about it when he was the planning director, as we get the team in place and settled and performing consistently, then one of the desires that I had was to revisit the Star Hill plan and bring it up to small area plan designation. Because it's missing some components and we need to complete those components. And then we can conclude that it is equal with the others, because there's no reason to have one vision plan and all the others be small area plans. And I think that the question about City Yard is a big feature of that plan, of course, but there were other things and still things probably that could be identified, that could be done. Because I wouldn't want that neighborhood to feel left out because the plan didn't meet the box to be checked as a small area plan. That's not fair to them. They didn't cause that.
Right.
So I think there's a fixing of that. We just haven't had the capacity to get to it yet.
But for the future, there will remain a giant city-owned parcel primarily used for parking vehicles and RN use.
And planning all the great work that happens in the city.
And purchasing, this procurement.
And procurement is there, yes.
I think most of the vehicles there are in use, but
Yeah.
We get your point. Yeah.
Including snow blowers and all that.
On that same page, for traffic signal infrastructure replacement,
Talk about that.
is that a list we see? Is there, what reviewed is there to make sure that each of those is something, a place where we still want a traffic signal? What goes into that?
I can speak to that. So there is a list. We are adjusting the process right now. The list that you have there, it's primarily based upon the structural integrity of the traffic signals. But we want to make sure that when we're doing the replacement of those signals, that it is the long-term, I guess, desire to keep a traffic signal at that location. So as part of the scoping, we have the engineering team looking at the traffic volumes, doing a quick cursory look to see are the traffic warrants justifying the need to keep a traffic signal there. And if there's any, I guess, any doubt whether it is, we would then kick that up to a more detailed study. With that being said, a more detailed study and any change moving away from a traffic signal, whether it would be a four-way stop or a potential roundabout, that would be a much more significant project and would take some time. But right now we are just focusing on FY 27, 28 intersections to make sure that those traffic signals are, without a doubt, they need to be replaced and they would remain a signalized intersection in the future.
Great, I do want to make sure that we are reviewing that, to make sure that they're all needed. Thank you.
Can I stay in the weeds on that for just a hot second? So what if it is a signal that needs to be changed? So if it's 3 of the 4 are a green arrow and the 4th one is an open green, and there's a need to change that last to an arrow from a green, would that happen at that audit or review or?
So I believe that we are looking at the mast arms, primarily the structural elements, and then looking at just the traffic volumes through the intersection. Where there are questions about
Function.
It's something that I'll have to bring up with the engineering team.
Thanks.
Because I know they've been looking at right turn onlys and things of that nature, so that would qualify as more of an engineering.
And the buttons to switch to no red, I know that's a thing that's been talked about too.
Other questions? Any expenditures?
Is it now really questions?
One week, only 1 week, no, what?
We can come back. I'm gonna go ahead and, skip ahead a little bit. So, you know, we've talked about expenditure. How do we pay for this? If we just look at 27, you know, just under 78% of this plan, will be funded by bonds. The general fund transfer, if you recall, we have a policy that we call our PAYGO policy that ensures that at least 3% of the general fund budget is going to the CIP to pay for cash funded projects. A lot of that, we have been exceeding that policy largely because of our affordable housing items that we have keyed into the plan that require us to do, that are not eligible for bonding, and so they are cash contributions. In 27, this is not new. I think this was back in 23. We did program some contingency dollars into the CIP to help offset that ebb and flow of the cash contribution from the general fund. And so in 27, we are using just under $2 million of contingency that was programmed in several years ago. There's not a change. It's been there for a while. And if you looked at this over the 5 years, the pie basically looks exactly the same. The contingency is a little smaller because it's this year was the biggest year that was programmed for contingency, but it's essentially, it looks the same. And so as we look to debt, part of the balancing act with the CIP is, you know, looking at our debt capacity versus what we can afford. For those of you that have been around for a while, you'll recall that many years ago, when we started talking about the Buford renovation, we threw out $50 million. And at that time, we were talking about the fact that that amount of money was going to exceed both our debt capacity and our affordability. Since then, and we'll look at this in just a minute, you know, our general fund has grown at such a rate that our debt capacity is really no longer an issue. It really does become the affordability piece of it, is how much debt can we afford to pay? Because while issuing debt is easy in the short term, it is something that is a 20+ year commitment that we do have to pay every year. And so if we kind of look at that overall, right now, our debt service, the green graph on the left, if you look at our projected annual debt service for 26, it's about $19.1 million, moving up to just over $26 million by 2031. Conversely, if you look at the blue chart on the right, this is what we are projecting the general fund transfers to be. And you'll see that this year we're at 15 million. We're not really moving the needle that much in 27. That was actually one of the budget balancing levers that we pulled before we presented this budget to you. But it takes us all the way up to a potential general fund transfer of just under $26 million in 5 very short years. And so
is there an inflation adjustment built into that, or is it just today's dollars?
this is based on what our actual debt, I'm going to show you what's behind these in just a second, but it's based on what we anticipate our actual debt service will be.
Got it. Oh, sorry, I was thinking about the 3%
Oh,
transfer.
the
But
3%
I
is
see what-
just based on whatever our budget is.
Yes, I was not reading the graph correctly.
No
Thank
worries.
you.
So, I mean, how are we managing this? And this, if you were to look at these two graphs, if you went back to this same work session over the last 5 years. This graph, both of these graphs have looked very similar. The way that we're mitigating this is, which I'm gonna show you the details behind this in 1 second, is that we have been funding our debt service fund to build up a fund balance for years in anticipation of greater debt service needs, that we're drawing down on that. We've been using one-time funds to put extra dollars in the debt service fund. And then we also have been working to annually increase the general fund transfer to get that base up to where it needs to be. So kind of a peek behind the curtain at what makes this up. This is a chart, and one thing I want to, always say before we look at this is don't get so hung up on the exact numbers. The idea of this is to kind of give you an idea of what are the pieces of the puzzle that we're working through each year as we look at our debt picture. So if we were to look at the planning side on the left, and again, anything in black is something that has already happened. So those are real numbers. That's the real amount of the bond issue. That's our real annual debt service and our real general fund budget. Anything in blue is what we're projecting, and it is subject to change for lots of reasons. One is we issue our bond rate, we issue bonds based on a cash need basis. So just because our CIP may say that we're spending 47 million in FY27, if we're not actually spending all of that 47 million, we're going to only sell bonds for what we know we are going to spend within 2 years as our cap for IRS reasons. And so they also, every year, the interest rate depends on the market and when we sell bonds and how much we're selling, so that our annual debt service can always change. Right now, the assumption that this chart is using, because interest rates have gone up considerably for a long time, we were basically selling bonds almost for free because it was at 1%, which now we're projecting about a 4%, 4 to 4.5 in the out years. And then our general fund, basically right now, this projection just assumes a 3% growth, which is conservative when you look at the debt capacity. Obviously, as the general fund grows, our debt capacity also increases. So this is a conservative view of that. But one thing to note is that from 2016 to 2031, our budget will have essentially doubled in about 15 years. And so that right there is one of the very big reasons why when we were looking at $50 million at one time and we thought we would exceed our capacity, was because our general fund was much smaller at that point. And so as we plan out, basically we do sell bonds on an annual basis. So that bond issue number is sort of a guess, if you will. We've been selling around $20-25 million. The 40 million in FY28 basically is a consideration of where we may be with the pre-K center, which is why that number is a little higher. But following over to the consequences of all that on the right-hand side is that if you were to take 27, for example, you'll see that our debt service payment in that column under the third column under the planning, our actual debt service payment is planned at $20.4 million. However, we're only transferring 15.8 million from the general fund. So we are basically drawing down on the debt service fund balance. And then in addition, you'll note that in 26, that $1.4 million that's in the additional funds, that was basically the gain sharing, the city's share of the gain sharing that was returned from the schools for their year ending 25. So because a lot of this debt service is being driven by school projects, we made the decision to put that money in the debt service fund. And that was a lever we were able to pull to not have to budget for as much of a transfer in 27. However, you'll note that quickly, if we don't have that sort of lever going forward, in 28, it looks like that at a minimum, in order to keep, because kind of the plan is that debt service fund balance is what can we contribute to keep that debt service fund balance either positive or at zero? You're looking at $2 million increases a year on your transfer to make sure that you're maintaining your debt service payment. So by the time we get to 2031, our debt payment is about 26.4 million, if everything worked out perfectly here. And we're still transferring, not quite that much. But when you get to 32, our general fund transfer is pretty much taking on the full freight of the debt service. And so this just contemplates what's currently in the CIP, with a little bit extra on those back ends, because obviously we don't have a CIP for 32, 33, 34. So it gives you about 60 million in play here. And again, this chart changes every year. The story is basically the same, but the takeaway is that, the debt service is something that we have to manage, but it is also something we have to budget and pay for, as we continue to issue the debt.
So does that, we can't do other projects until the debt service comes down? What does it mean for us as we look at new projects or not looking at projects?
So a couple of things is, I think, this is something that we actively manage every year as part of the budget process. We might not issue $25 million of bonds this year or even 20, so it keeps moving the chart down. I think we also take, every time we sell bonds, we look for refunding opportunities to refinance that debt at a cheaper rate, which helps some of this. I wouldn't want to say, are you limited to 60 million? No, that's not really the answer here, but it does sort of put in perspective that it's not an unlimited supply to continue to balance, out $200 million CIPs, plans for the longevity. At some point, as Sam has been referring to, the runway is getting shorter and shorter. And it also depends on your appetite in terms of what you're willing to dedicate in new revenue for bond payments, essentially. But the other thing.
It's your cash.
Correct.
Just remembering that part of it. That's your cash and that's your flexible money to do other things.
So to give you some perspective, like before we added the tax increase to the 27 budget, we were talking about you had $11 million of new money. If you were to follow this chart, roughly 2 million of that right off the top would come out for debt service, barring everything here working out perfectly. But we continue, we continue to look for additional sources and different things to do here. So we are actively managing it, and we share this exact conversation and table with the bond rating agencies. And they're comfortable that our process is sound, and that it doesn't raise a lot of red flags by the fact that we are looking at this and managing it. But I guess some good news is that, as you know, that at the state level, there is some conversation about the possibility of being able to use a 1% sales tax increase for school construction. Right now, the sales tax that the city collects is roughly the equivalent of 1% of sales. So sales tax rate is 5.3%. The city gets about 1% of that back from the state, which is, in this budget for 27, we were estimating is about $16 million. If we were to use all of that for debt service, that would equate to about $178 million of debt that could be issued. The 1 cent sales tax has to be used only for school construction projects. There are terms and restrictions about how and what it can be used for, I think, that are still being discussed. And the other thing to note is that Sales tax is dependent on the economy, as we know. So for the first several months of this year, we were seeing pretty concerning declines in our sales tax revenue. So issuing debt is a fixed, steady payment, whereas, we are estimating what we think the sales tax will bring in every year. So one of the things we are working with our financial advisor on is a potential policy to come and talk to you about what best practices may be, that if we were to get this 16 million or to get the authority to issue or to increase the sales taxes, what does that look like? Does it look like all of it towards debt service? Does it look like some of it for cash and some of it for debt service? What are sort of the best practices? What have other localities that already have permission to use that 1%? What are they doing? So we'll be having more conversations about that as time comes, and also as the legislation firms up, so we know what we can or cannot do with the funds. So that's will be another consideration for council to discuss going forward, and will impact that ugly table that we just talked about as well, for sure. So I'll stop there. And what questions do you have?
Yesterday I talked to a group of students at the comm school, and I knew enough about this because this type of question came up, so I sounded like I remember that chart, so I knew I was talking about it. I was impressed with the management, so thank you.
One of the things I think about with the chart is one, essentially kind of taking out 2022 to 2025, not taking it out, but because nationwide assessments doubled on average, we kind of followed that trend. That was because of the pandemic. That's just not going to happen again. So kind of in my mind, I just take that out as like expecting going forward that kind of increase can happen again.
For growth?
Yeah. For the level of general fund and budget growth. But I take away just watching, what is, again, taking out the weirdness of the pandemic years. Every year watching what is our general fund expenditure budget growth, and is it beating projections or is it lower than our projections? Because that's just obviously gonna have a huge influence on
Sure.
the level of debt we can issue, so.
And we use 3% here to be the most conservative, so that, what is the worst case scenario in which you would reach your debt limit? And obviously, we're not there. And to your point, our general fund growth has been more than 3%, but that only makes that percentage less. So it's to your benefit to look at this more conservatively for when we're planning. But also there's a balance to not be too conservative.
Yeah, especially because it just, obviously compounds over time. But I know even when we take out the weirdness of the pandemic years, we have beat 3%.
Absolutely.
You just don't want to overshoot, that's the thing.
Can I ask an unrelated question? Obviously, none of this embraces money that we expect to get from affordable housing payments in lieu. Should that be reflected in some way in this budget?
I'll speak and then they can speak. In my opinion, I think that is a policy issue, or a policy decision. We do know that money is coming. We don't know exactly when or how much. And I think by not programming it here, it gives council an opportunity to look at that sort of as a singular issue, and gives you an opportunity to decide if you want to use that for something new and great in addition to what you've already contemplated, or, as opposed to putting it here and then kind of putting stuff in and then, what happens 2 years from now when someone's like, hey, I've got a great idea for this $11 million, but now you've already programmed it in the CIP. So I think it's a policy issue. But I'll back up and let anyone else speak.
I'll say, you probably know what I'm gonna say, but I'm reluctant to plan it as though we know it's gonna always happen.
Sure.
So for that reason, I would be more inclined to say that we should adopt a policy that would speak to more of a percentage that we felt comfortable because our development activity had hit a certain stride, therefore it was producing a series of these chunks of money that we could predict, we could anticipate. And therefore we could safely budget some of it in a manner that it would work for this particular exercise. My preference would be that we hold it to what we consider the surplus is capable of doing. That when you receive it, and you can plan in advance of receiving it, but when you receive it, you can do something transformative with it, or you can do a certain number of things that haven't been able to be fitted to fit into our 5-year plan in the CIP specifically. It just provides that flexibility to, again, not overshoot. That's what my concern would be, is that we would base something on, we would base our plan on something that we might not get in a certain year, because we're relying in this case on developers bringing forward their projects, and something could go wrong with them. That's not the economy base, it's just something with them. And we've tied it to the idea that based on when we approved it through our planning process, we anticipated that 2 years of construction, we would have it. But if they incurred some moment, we don't have any control over that or any ability to do anything but make the adjustments. So why go too far, too fast in planning what comes of that money with that possibility? That's where I sit. If our zoning code had just kind of been going like gangbusters now, like you want it to be with this blitz concept, and it's just churning out project after project, and we could start truly anticipating what each year might feel like, I'd be all for, let's start plugging more of that in, because it's more anticipated what we could rely on.
Well, I mean, let's assume for the moment that the only thing we factored in was the money that we expect to receive on, say by January 1, or the beginning, sometime in the fiscal year for a project already underway.
Yeah.
This gets back to the question that we so far have not yet discussed, which is, if we get, let's say, $6 million in of affordable housing payment in lieu kind of money, does that mean that we would go in this fiscal year to $17 million on affordable housing? Or can we, for example, use part of that money to sort of a replacement for other funds? I gather that the money itself has to go to housing, but it doesn't mean we can't kind of reprogram things. And one of the things that I've suggested before is that if we look at affordable housing and transit as effectively two sides of the same coin, which is the way housing advocates look at it, that we might find ourselves able to afford more in the way of transit if we, as opposed to saying we're going to allocate all of that money specifically to affordable housing, and there'd be $17 million in 1 year, and maybe 3 more years go by before it's another big chunk. But that's the discussion we've never had.
Sure. That does speak to the policy that Chrissy's mentioning, like that conversation needs to happen so that we can clearly hear from you what it is that you desire, and then we build around it. Yep. I can take that as if that's a request for us to plan a work session around that, then we can do that.
I think we
Because
ought
we
to have
haven't
some
booked that.
organized discussion of the
Sure.
matter.
Okay.
You okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think landing at clarity on the question.
So that's all we really have on the CIP. I mean, the last thing I had to show you was the CDBG application. So Anything else on the CIP before we move to that?
So you probably know where I'm going with what I use that. So is there anything what we're doing or where we heading that keeps you up at
No, I
I'm
mean,
always up at night.
That's why that's you or James.
I mean, I do, you know, I feel like every year our CIP gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And a lot of the projects that, you know, there's no longer the $1 million projects, they're multi-million-dollar projects. But I think, you know, we have continued to manage those well. You
So
know,
you have guardrails in place to keep us, in place, so that,
we
if
have guardrails to ring the bell for you when it's time.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
That money bag slide. It's one of the guardrails.
Meant to be, that's right. The constant reminders, that's what.
Yeah. Are there any questions on the CIP? Any additional questions? or comments?
Two final questions. For the affordable housing CIP, the whatever the 10th and Wortland project, did that developer submit any request for CIP funding? Where are the areas they submitted any requests of funding?
Yeah, remember that was back when I did the budget brief for you all on housing. We had the 3 projects, Brick Lane, Community. Yeah, I can't remember what it was
The hotel.
$900,000. Brick Lane is the conversion of the Holiday Inn, and then POLA for the 10th and Wortland. So all 3 of those were the 3 projects that came in through our RFI process, where we request for information about a development project. We went back to all 3 parties. The $900,000 project was the one that you all tended to seem as though you would be willing to fund. We did not make it fit into this CIP. We ran out of space because we have to balance the cash component. I think I asked Chrissy a couple of times, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And she said pretty close, so it wasn't gonna fit. So we weren't able to make it fit within FY27. The conversation with Brick Lane was one that they weren't really interested in making the potential adjustments to their unit mix, which then in our mind left that project out of scope for consideration. It was bigger than the other one anyway. And POA, we had a couple of conversations with, and ultimately the conversation ended with more of you should go back to the university and have a conversation with them about they need to have a conversation with us. Because they were more or less in a position that they were carrying the university's burden for the conversation that needed to be had with this organization. So it ended there.
And that conversation with UVA has not happened yet?
No one has reached out, so I assume he delivered the message. I don't know how they took that message, but no one has reached out indicating that they would like to have any conversation about.
Any other questions on this? Before we move on, the 1%, Sam, when you were talking about that, are we working with the schools or, once, and Lloyd had mentioned this, we just need to be prepared to get the message out, and
That's his job. I mean, so.
Are you talking about for the referendum?
yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about
Oh,
what
sorry.
to use the money for, sorry.
Oh, yeah, I'm like, man, you're
No.
really expanding.
Your meeting on how to
Yeah,
explain what we do, well, that is part of his job. So we've done preliminary work as.
No, I'm sorry. Not what we do to get the message out to the public to support this. Is that?
Yeah, we have not done work on that yet. Of course, we're waiting to see
Yeah,
what
yeah.
comes out of it because we need the details on the bill being passed as to what the message gets to be. I think what I feel like I was hearing is, yes, we need to make sure that we have a clear presentation of what will come of those funds if we were to allow this tax to be passed. So that is tying back to Mike's prior work and ongoing work
Yeah.
of identifying what we anticipate a series of projects to look like over a period of time. That would be what would amount to a facilities program. It's what I've been talking about since I got here, that we should have a facilities program identified for school buildings across the system, identifying what we deem the needs to be, what the project scope could look like, what the potential budget may be, and a schedule. And now, if we were to have a sales tax pass, we will have a projected dollar amount that we can rely on every year, which is why I asked Chrissy to identify what is the debt service capacity that we would be able to rely on for how far we go. That number exceeds what we preliminarily identified, but when he finishes his work, that number ain't gonna cut it. It won't cover all the projects that we know are in that list. And it definitely does not touch a high school in a forming of a new one. So I can assure everyone that this won't do that. But what I would anticipate being able to clearly do is identify what would be the makings of a facilities program that the public could appreciate receiving something to look at and have some indication of what would happen amongst the middle schools. We know that elementary schools, we know that the middle school wouldn't need anything probably in that window of time. It would be the elementary schools and the high school that would be identified as what that scope of projects could be over what period of time. And is there a replacement of one of the elementary schools or a new one would be a part of that factor too. But
Well,
I appreciate the fact that you will want to have that. So yes, we know that we would need to be able to produce that.
I had said that, I think the last time I mentioned it, that we should have such a plan in mind by May 1st. But given that the General Assembly won't even have a decision on anything until at least April 23rd at the earliest, maybe June 1st is a more realistic
Yeah.
timeframe.
Yeah, I think the preliminary work that's been done, I think we all would nod that we feel good about what we saw in that work, that assessment work, that we could frame, here are a series of initial projects that we would like to see getting done. And we would put that in front of school board and the superintendent. And I'm sure they would concur very easily on a number of them. And that probably would be the initial package that we would put out there.
But that work group does include school staff as well.
Right.
So it's not just city staff.
I mean, the ongoing CIP work that we're already doing is gonna help us identify things that could be done as well.
We have the school facilities working group.
Yeah.
Right, that's.
True.
that's
They would be
doing
the
a
ones to
long-range
finalize
plan,
what the
and
list
that
looks like.
has representatives from Mike and his team and the schools department. Looking at what the needs are and developing a, I forget what, 20-year plan.
I was thinking 10, but
10,
it can be 20 because there's plenty.
There's plenty to do, so.
Well, the 1% is only for a certain number of years.
So the last version did not have a sunset.
Really?
And I know that at least Michael and I started talking about this issue before we really knew that this had a shot of going forward. Because there's just real need in the fact that we have 50-year-old schools that are in great shape thanks to our team, but they are not meeting the needs of a modern school building in many cases. So the idea was, let's think about what the need is and try and think about what a realistic time frame is for getting that done. What the 1% does is potentially accelerate that time frame.
It would have been the conversation, we would be still having this conversation about schools construction, whether the 1% sales tax was on the table or not. Because in all of the conversations, we're finding that we're getting things done on an annual basis, but the things cost more. So we're running out of the smaller things to do, and therefore the money isn't gonna go far enough. Hence why my question was about a facilities program in the first place. So we were gonna need to be dealing with that no matter what. This is a great relief that we will have a source provided the public agrees to make it available for that particular use. But we should be able to address a lot of need. And in the initial work, we anticipated capacity. So unless something dramatically changes, I think we have a good course ahead for what to do. Now it's how we pay for it.
Okay, the CDB,
Yeah,
is that
so
something?
just real quickly, this is, again, this is still in committee, so no decisions have been made or recommendations. This is just a snapshot of what has been applied for. I believe there are 11 applicants. You can see the programs here. We have two pots of money. One is the CDBG pot and one is the home pot of money. The total request for CDBG was 597,000, 185,000 for home. There's an admin portion that comes out of the CDBG pot of money. We don't know what the exact awards are from HUD at this point, but we've anticipated what those are. And so, like with VCF and other processes, there's always more asked than we have funding. Right now, as this looks about $241 million short from being able to fully fund all of, oh, sorry, 241,000. I'm in CIP world, all right. And then $99,000 short from being able to fully fund the home request. But this gives you some idea of who's applied and what they're applying for. And I believe that goes to the Planning Commission within the next week or so. And then I think formal recommendations will be coming to council in May.
Okay.
And that's it. That's all we have.
Okay. So any other questions?
We'll talk about next week.
Keena, anyone signed up to speak? I know some people came in. Anyone like to speak in the back? Okay. I didn't say. Any other questions or comments at this time? We need to decide on next week or.
If y'all aren't interested in talking about anything else. Because we only have one work session left.
Do we want to talk about, I don't know if we're all ready to talk about VCF, but do we want to talk about the 1 cent increase option and what we were presented last week, or there's been some chatter about for future self. Well, we can talk future self later, anyway. Or anything that can help give them guidance for more information we need to help make that decision or not.
So you mean like if we pass an increase or support that, then it may be more difficult to get the 1 cent for the school?
No,
What do you think?
there's, I think we'd all said we wanted to do everything we possibly could to make sure that a tax increase was necessary. So one of the options they gave us last week was the take from the Strategic Initiatives Fund, take from
Oh,
the
yeah.
other fund, right? And then because we had to make up 1.4 million. I wondered if we could get like a longer runway to see if the state would make its decision by the 23rd, and that might not, that's not really, that deadline is not really possible in this short period of time, but maybe something we want to look at for future self. So if there were other like magic tricks we wanted to look at, or if there were other suggestions on that 1 cent thing.
I think the 1 cent, we mapped out the math for the 1 cent thing and it
Yeah,
made sense.
Chris is pulling it up as well, so you can just be reminded. It was the revising of the revenue is the bulk of it. So that's why it's not 2 cents on the real estate tax anymore. It's now 1. And then the difference would be
It's like 300 and,
41,000.
yes, yeah. So we wouldn't need in that, if we do the 1 cent, we would need to contribute the citywide reserve and
To pull from the citywide reserve
Reserve and
and
the
pull from the
strategic
council
initiative.
strategic initiatives.
Yeah.
Or pull more from the citywide reserve and not touch the strategic initiatives if you all are planning to use more of it for known things.
There's room now to do this plan.
Okay. So that's really, so we're looking for, whether it's tonight or next Thursday, we're looking for you to finalize what scenario we are actually going with for offsetting, for addressing the fact that you're stepping back from a 2 cent increase on the real estate tax to a 1 cent increase on the real estate tax. So it's only, again, you're only short the $231,000. Because the revenue adjustment is $1.5 million, and that gives you the bulk.
To just second and agree with the point Jen had raised, to me, one of the questions is, because of our city code, which we have the power to change, there's a provision from 1974 that we have to adopt our budget by April 15th. Many other localities in Virginia adopt it May, June, have the flexibility to not do that. We won't know the state's budget until at least April 23rd, so we're adopting it before their special session even begins. Our school's budget right now that we're basing this off is based off the budget introduced by Glenn Youngkin. And Roanoke's a good counterexample, where they're gonna adopt their budget in either May or June. They based their school's budget on, they modeled the House of Delegates budget and the state Senate budget. The state Senate budget increases their funding by almost $7 million. Their school's budget is about twice ours, all of which is to say the General Assembly could very well impact between $1 to $3 million in our budget, which would determine whether we raise the real estate tax rate or not. And one, do we have the space to extend our deadline by any amount this year to, as best we can, try to know the outcome, and certainly for next year, to not have us be in the situation where we're making a decision without full information that is at the scale of a tax increase or not.
So since we're already this deep into this year's budget cycle, and this is something that comes up during the budget cycle every year and not that far in advance, is this something that you're asking the rest of us if there is a desire to ask our staff to look into it for next year? Is that a question that you have?
Yes, as it's, yes, both for next year and also, is there any ability to do it this year?
Well, as a practical matter, tax tickets have to go out to people by May 1st or so. So I don't know that we have the ability to hold off making a decision until after April 23rd. I mean, unless we decide we're not going to raise real estate, or unless we decide on a fixed real estate tax number, which is, I mean, trying to avoid that is kind of the purpose of your inquiry, I think.
So, I mean, we've looked at it from staff perspective, in terms of could we do it? The answer is yes. It buys you about 2 weeks though. The reason for that is, and I would defer to John whether it's even possible for this year or not, but part of what has to happen is as Counselor Snook referred to, is we'd have to change the due date on the tax bills, first of all, from, I think, like June 5th is the current date. It would probably have to be moved to like June 20th-ish. And then we have to back that up and allow time for one, your approval, and then two, for that information to actually get to the printer and get, I think there's a 30-day requirement on the bill for the taxpayer, which is why we'd have to move the due date. So I think all in all, by the time we finish it, it buys you about 2 weeks, time on the, on waiting on the state, if you.
So that is, if we were to do that this year, it could buy about 2 weeks. Next year, making the adjustments, it could be longer than that.
Yeah, but I think the question is, our charter says April 15th. I don't know if we have time to change that for this year, but we could for next year.
It's not merely a question of an ordinance and charter.
I don't think it's a charter.
Oh, okay, my,
If it is an ordinance piece, I will double check that.
Okay.
Make sure, because right now I'm looking at our code section that says that the council shall approve the annual budget and shall make such city levy prior to April 15th of each year. It was 1976, you're close, when that went into effect. That can be, that's the, y'all know me, I love nothing more than amending an ordinance. So that's completely possible, but as you said, there are practical implications that go along with this. That's more in the treasurer's magisterium.
For revenue collection.
There would be a revenue collection impact whenever we make the change, the first year of the change. As basically identified is that it's going to cross over the 45-day accrual period. So we would close
Which
out
means what?
we close the fiscal year.
so the first, if bills are due on June 5th, you have, from an accounting standpoint, 45 to anything that's collected from 45 days from June, after June 30th, can be accrued back to the fiscal year. So, that would be, August 15th-ish. And if we move the tax due date, you lose 2 weeks off of that. So the 45 days would short you time. But you can change the accrual. It's an accounting change, but it can be done, and it would have to go from a 45-day accrual to a 60-day accrual.
And finance confirmed that they didn't see a problem with that. So I think everything was good.
So it doesn't affect like right now, if things are due June 5th, then we have three-ish weeks before the new fiscal year. If we get everything June 20th, is that enough turnaround time to get the new fiscal year ready? Or
Well, that's part of the thing of that, even if we, there does need to be some, I think we have to provide 30 days notice for how much is due. So we have to get the bills out 30 days before the due date. So back 30 days up, let's say we make it June 20th, got to back that up 30 days. And then we've got to allow time to actually get that information to the printer for them to be processed and then mailed. So, it does, you know, all in all, it buys you, I think we came down to it buys you about 2 weeks of extra time.
Okay, but that being this budget year, it could be more time beyond that next year.
From a staff perspective, I don't think we're comfortable that we could actually get, I think we're not comfortable that all the pieces and parts that need to happen, that there's much more time beyond that, because there's a lot of pieces that have to fall into place. I mean, I guess you could make the bill due June 30th. But you know, we can't say, here's the budget and then have it ready to go July 1. So there's a lot of administrative stuff that happens, but it's mostly about processing the bills and getting them mailed and then giving people time to pay them. So I think whatever we land on would be whatever it is going forward.
That's helpful. But again, often 2 to 3 weeks is difference between knowing the state budget.
Fair.
In this case, it's a difference of about 6 weeks on the budget minimum.
Any other questions? So Sam, do you want to know tonight, like what?
Whatever you can tell me, is
Yeah.
what I'm saying. Because ultimately, what I'm really just advising you is that you have one work session left next Thursday. In that session, we would need to hear from you the scenario resolution here. We know that you've taken schools off the list. We know that you've taken CAT off the list. At least that's what I read from the last conversation. So are we going to tap into the citywide reserve? And to what degree? Are we going to tap into council strategic initiatives fund? To what degree? To make up the difference that is needed to offset 1 penny of the real estate tax to go with your revenue adjustment, which is the updated number that Ms. Hamill gave you last week. So we need a resolution for this because this is a hole in the budget until we resolve it. And your decisions in regards to any allocations from the Council Strategic Initiatives Fund for VCF candidates or anything else
What
that
is
you
the
want to do.
best, since that's a list of things that would be weird to like communicate by reading it aloud. I don't know, should we, do you want it in advance?
You just
To
want the full
review,
number that
what
we
is
want?
the,
No, I
what's the
mean,
best way to deliver that information to make it easy for you to process and build?
we need line item because that's a part of the budget. So the line item usage is what we're looking for. Do we have to have it?
So what we've done in the past with that is, you know, because of FOIA things, you can't deliberate behind the scenes. So your list does need to be discussed openly and publicly. But one thing we have done in the past is we have had counselors send their list directly to the city manager or to the budget team. And then we come prepared with a spreadsheet where we actually do the math live and in person. You know, these were the suggestions, and then you all can say yes, no, whatever, and make the sausage that way. That's kind of how we've gotten around that.
So you can do that between now and next Wednesday. So that
But-
we can have a slide ready for you on Thursday.
But I would say as much time as you can give us in advance, because there are some times that you have suggestions that don't work because of other reasons, and we would want to be able to have that back and forth with you.
Yeah.
Maybe we should amend your deadline to Monday.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it all depends.
And
I don't know.
what is the process for, if we call it the Strategic Initiatives Fund, could we change it, the title to Council Reserve Fund?
Doesn't matter.
I didn't know if that was a code
That's-
thing or.
No. We called it something else before we started calling it that.
Yeah, it's been called, I mean, Keena and I were just talking about that today. Somewhere else, it's called Council Strategic Investment Fund. It's been it gets.
Yeah.
It's whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, we can change that. That's fine. And then I guess the final question is, and was there anything else about the budget that you, I'm looking at you, Newbie. Is there anything else that you were curious about, wanted to talk about? Was there some consideration that you might be thinking you wanted to bring up to other council members? Because that would be your last shot. That's kind of why we leave it unplanned in case there's something, but we aren't looking for real surprises either, because we only have a week after that.
I had a request for next year's budget.
Love it.
So I'll wait for that.
We always do an after action,
Okay,
so we
good.
will happily take that and plan that.
I think we can. I think everyone's been working on BCF, and I think we can probably get you the spreadsheets with probably by end of day tomorrow, by Monday,
Okay,
for sure.
great.
Um,
That's good, because we can do our work in our budget team meeting in preparation for Thursday.
okay, and that's good. And then that will also answer the lump sum contribution to that. I think one of the add-ons to that is again, we won't have we won't have numbers for you until Monday's spreadsheet, but a consideration to set aside some of the strategic initiatives fund, again, not a yes or no yet, but has been thrown around for standing up an arts council to handle arts and culture organizations outside of the Mr. Freeze's recommendation for a public arts commission. So
That's an example of what I'm looking for.
yeah,
If there's anything else like that, that we might need to prepare some, discussion points or something like that, we need to know.
Yeah. I think something we've had in conversations, kind of less formally, but we recognize that there's a need for additional bandwidth in the housing department. And so keeping in mind, if we can't fit it in this year, what can we do to make sure that we have staffing for next year?
You did, by saying that again, you did. And we are looking at different ways to just kind of mitigate the impact of not having individuals in that seat. Now, we're working with our financial advisor to backfill some analysis perspectives as well, and helping us kind of assess where we are. But it's a priority.
So it looks like we're going to be meeting next Thursday.
Yep, does
And
sound like you're gonna be meeting next Thursday.
We will discuss, give you our final decision on the breakdown of the making up the difference in that 1 cent. And as usual, spend quality time with BCF, so.
That's what you call it, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a few more things, I mean. Whether we do or do not adopt our budget before we know what the state's budget is, we do know what the House and Senate proposals are. Is there an interest from other counselors to direct staff to model what our budget would look like under the House and state Senate budget as opposed to the Youngkin budget, which is over $500 million less in education funding?
I'd like to see that modeling. I think it's not, I think it is school staff that would have to do that for us, but whichever staff it is.
At least we consult them. I can get to work on them.
Yeah.
Only if there's somebody on the school board who might be able to put in a word on that.
Here's
And
where I'm just.
I would definitely agree with the point about housing staff. I can send an email with just the PowerPoint presentation that the Housing Advisory Committee received, and that is available online in their agenda. But I think it would be a fair summary that their presentation was that our current housing staffing levels are unsustainable and very out of line with how many programs we do. So we just second that, and I think it was like 5 positions total. 2 of the things that we can reach a decision point on, at our last work session, very small amount of budget things, but if other counselors are interested in funding the participatory budgeting pilot program, that's like a $10,000 to $30,000 total allocation. And then second, next year is gonna be the 10th anniversary of the summer of 2017. Whether we want from, I don't know where in the budget it comes from, again, some amount of money to be preparing for memorializing that anniversary and having the community involved in a process, figuring out what does a permanent memorialization of 4th Street look like. That doesn't need to be a huge amount of money, but just something to prepare for it. Again, not asking for a decision tonight or anything like that, but those are potentially things others were interested in.
So, Michael, you had explained to us what the participatory is, what that would look like. Can you explain it again?
And Jen can also give a line.
Oh, is that, was it?
I think it's super cool, but I probably can't give you the like down-home logistics about it, but it's a facilitated process of, I've seen it done in neighborhood by neighborhood of engaging the public in determining what they truly want to spend the budget, parts of the budget on, and how that's reflected to their desires. And Michael, I might be too oversimplifying, so jump in. So it's like the Monopoly nights on steroids. It's like a lot of conversation, it's a lot of engagement, hence the fee that comes with it to kind of facilitate those conversations. But it tends to engage folks in all levels of government and how we operate because they get so engrossed and involved with the decision making.
But I mean, how does this, you know, cause I've done countless like transportation meetings when I was doing that type of thing, even when I was in school, where you get the same people, how do you get you have to be in the room, or is it you get gathered people that we know really don't come to meetings, because we could get skewed if a group or whatever sends, you know, get everyone to come to the meeting, but I don't know if this approach has a way of preventing that.
So I would say, Richmond's done a lot with it, and Charlottesville almost did a pilot, and then August 2017 happened and all the staff left within a period before it was implemented. But their strategy was gonna be, you pick a neighborhood, you have $10,000 to $30,000 total that could be allocated, and they would go door to door, knocking doors in the neighborhood explicitly to try to get people who don't normally show up. And part of that process would be just engaging with what the city budget looks like for people who, you know, haven't historically don't engage. And they did a small pilot, and just a lot of good conversations came from it. And I think a lot of people who were never involved in local government were thinking about, oh, the city can't plant flowers here because of right of way. Like I never thought about like that kind of thing.
We had we still have the framework from when we did it before, and we did get as far as having some projects, but you're right, it didn't go further than that.
Yeah, so I you know, I definitely, before we say to move forward with that, I just want to have a little bit more conversations about what it will look like, you know, but
We have a local community member who's like an expert in participatory budgeting facilitation, so I can ask her what some of that looks
yeah,
like.
my concern, I just noticed community, and that if we don't get the people that won't come to meetings, we just won't get the full picture. I know we can get the input from the people that come, because they're gonna come, and we'll extract some great information, but it's the people that don't come that I think have some valuable input in as well, but yeah.
So can I just take it for the top for what our homework is for Monday? So we're gonna do what part of the 1 cent we want to take from city reserves and or strategic initiative. We're gonna have our input on CYF sorted your direction, the spreadsheet for everyone's spreadsheet for what they
VCO.
see, yeah, VCF. And then what's our last piece of homework that we need to give to
Do
you?
you have anything else?
Anything else? Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're right. If there's no other information, is there a motion to adjourn? I want to make sure you have anything you want to say.
I mean, I think, do I need to come up here?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So there's no mic here, so I'll project. My comments are pretty consistent with what they've always been, fund the schools. I sat in a classroom today at Summit doing like a special reading group that's been convening twice a week the past year, with Miss Howard, our youth opportunities coordinator, and some community volunteers. And I mean, there's a lot of improvement that's happening and important work that's happening with tying communities to our schools, but funding is needed. And I have watched your conversations about collective bargaining, and I have to say that I think there's still a lack of clarity. And I think that if there are questions for the school board, I would encourage you to ask those questions, but ultimately, like, our support staff needs that increase. So collective bargaining is something that we must prioritize. And everything that we gave you was a needs-based budget. It's not like a dream budget, it's a needs-based budget. Sorry, I should have started with, I'm speaking as a community member and as an individual, but as someone who is interested in seeing money poured into the schools. And so the budget that was presented from the schools was a need-based budget. And I need us to remember that, like, there are a lot of needs, there are a lot of unique needs with the diverse student population that we have in Charlottesville. And truthfully, the schools could use way more money than the budget that was presented, but I do think that any reductions of that it's not doing it justice. And I'm speaking to you as, again, a community member who went through our schools, is still in our community and is still working with students and doing that, like, mentoring work and volunteering work. And I know that there's a real need there. And so this is kind of my final appeal to you. I'll probably be back next week, but to please fund the schools and to give the full amount that was requested. It's really, really needed. And we're talking about, you know, bigger city ideas and things that we need to memorialize and all of these things. And I think they're all important. And I want to add that the best way that we invest in our community is through our schools. And of course, through affordable housing. So I think it's important to make space for all of those things, but to remember that education is shaping our future leaders. So thank you all for your work. And like I said, I'll see you next week.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please say no. Thank you all so much.